You ever get that feeling that you're kind of like a character in a play, but you were never given the script? Like someone else is pulling strings you can't quite see, guiding your decisions and emotions in a way that just feels off. Well, it turns out there's often a hidden playbook at work. It's this collection of psychological tactics, all designed to influence you, all while keeping you completely in the dark. So, let's dive into that playbook. Let's turn on the lights and learn to spot every single move.
Just take a second and really think about that. A time you walked away from a conversation just feeling confused. Or maybe a time you felt this sudden pang of guilt that made you completely change your mind. Or you agreed to something and it was only later that it hit you that wasn't what you wanted at all. That feeling right there, that's often the first subtle clue that you've just seen a play from this very book.
So let's be super clear about what we're talking about here. Manipulation isn't some honest debate. It's not trying to persuade you of facts. No, its power is in its secrecy. It's like a covert operation against your own judgment. The manipulator's real goal, what they actually want, is totally hidden. And instead of using logic, they target the very architecture of your mind, your emotions, your insecurities, and your basic human need to connect with people.
Okay, so to really get how this works, we're going to break down the playbook into three main parts. First, tactics that mess with your sense of reality. Second, tactics that play on your emotions. And third, tactics that pressure you into making decisions. And then, most importantly, we're going to finish with the ultimate strategy, your best defense against all of it.
All right, let's start with maybe the most insidious category. These techniques are so destabilizing because they're not just trying to change your mind about one thing. Nope, they're trying to change your trust in your own mind. It's all about subtly rewriting your perception of reality itself.
The first play is probably one you've heard of, and it's one of the most destructive: gaslighting. Look, this isn't a one-time trick. It's a slow, methodical process. It's like water dripping on a stone, just eroding your confidence over time. The whole goal is for the manipulator to become the one who defines reality for you by convincing you that your own memory and your own feelings just can't be trusted.
What's so wild about these phrases is just how normal they sound. They're the building blocks of gaslighting. If you hear them once, you just brush it off. But when you hear them over and over, for weeks or months, they start to create this pattern of self-doubt. You start thinking, well, maybe I am remembering that wrong, or maybe I am being too emotional. And that's exactly where the manipulator wants you, unsure of yourself and looking to them for the truth.
Okay, next up is a classic defensive move. It is a masterclass in misdirection. So instead of taking any accountability for what they did, the manipulator does this perfect flip and makes their actions your fault. It's like a psychological judo throw. It's designed to deflect all the consequences away from them and land them right on you.
And this shows you exactly how it works. Just look at the way the language is structured. Both of these sentences frame the manipulator as this passive person who was just reacting. You are the cause, and their bad behavior was just the effect. It doesn't just get them off the hook. It actually burdens you with guilt, which makes it almost impossible to hold them responsible for anything.
Okay, let's move on. If that first set of tactics was an attack on your mind, this next set goes straight for the heart. These plays have nothing to do with logic. They are all about weaponizing our most basic feelings: guilt, love, fear, and using them against us.
Normally guilt is actually a pretty useful emotion. It helps us fix our mistakes and be good to each other. But in the hands of a manipulator, it becomes a tool for control. A guilt trip pressures you to do something not because you want to, but because you're scared of being seen as a bad, selfish, or ungrateful person.
This is the all-time classic guilt trip phrase, right? But let's break down what it's really doing. It's not just a statement, it's an invoice. it instantly creates this feeling of emotional debt. It basically reframes your entire relationship as a series of transactions where you're always behind on payments. And it implies that the only way to even start to repay that debt is to do whatever they want right now. This next tactic, wow, the emotional roller coaster. It creates total instability by putting you on this cycle of praise and then criticism. One minute you're being showered with compliments, you feel amazing. The next, for no reason at all, you get the cold shoulder or some sharp criticism. This whole up and down cycle makes you desperate for the good moments, so you start working harder and harder to get their approval back. And that creates this really powerful, addictive dependency.
Love bombing is kind of like a super concentrated version of that roller coaster, all packed into the beginning. It starts with this huge flood of affection. They'll tell you your soulmates that they've never met anyone like you. But this whole intense phase, it's just the setup. The entire point is to get you hooked on that high. And then, once you're attached, they pull it all away, leaving you scrambling to do whatever it takes to get that amazing feeling back.
Okay, so here's what's so crucial to understand about the silent treatment. It has a deep biological impact. Scientists have actually found that being ignored activates the same part of our brain that processes physical pain. Think about that. Your brain literally perceives being ignored as a threat to your survival. So by using silence, a manipulator triggers this deep-seated anxiety, this primal need to reconnect, which often means you end up giving in to whatever they want.
All right, let's look at the final set of tactics in the playbook. These are all about forcing your hand. They're designed to completely bypass your rational brain and push you into making a quick decision, one that helps them, before you've had a chance to really think.
This one is so clever because it uses our own psychology against us, specifically our need to be consistent. See, once we've said yes to a tiny, harmless request, saying no to a bigger one feels wrong. It feels inconsistent. That first little yes doesn't just get a foot in the door, it props the whole thing wide open for much bigger requests down the line. So here we're seeing the creation of false urgency. There's this idea that our brains have two systems, a fast, emotional one and a slow, logical one. Well, when we're put under time pressure, our brains automatically default to that fast, gut reaction system. And manipulators know this. They create this artificial pressure to bypass your logic and force a gut decision, which, surprise, is almost always the one that benefits them. This tactic taps into our deep evolutionary fear of being the odd one out. There were these famous experiments back in the 50s that showed people will knowingly agree with a wrong answer just to fit in with the group. So what a manipulator does is create the illusion of a consensus. They make you feel like you are the only one holding out, and that pressure makes you question your own judgment and just go along with the group.
And to round out the playbook, we've got two final moves. Now, we already talked about silent punishment. It's that silent treatment we covered, a really powerful tool. So let's focus on the other one, false authority. This is when someone tries to win an argument not with facts, but by mentioning unnamed experts or studies, or just by puffing up their own experience. The goal is to make their opinion seem like it can't be challenged, shutting down any real discussion.
So, after running through this entire dark playbook, the big question is, what do we do about it? How do we defend ourselves? Well, it's actually simpler and way more empowering than you might think. The real power is in what we've just been doing for the last few minutes.
Here's the most important thing to get. Manipulation works not because we're weak or foolish, it works because it exploits the very source code of being human. These so-called vulnerabilities, they aren't bugs in our system, they're features. Our need for connection, for approval, for consistency. These are the very things that let us build families and societies. They are our greatest strengths, which also means they're our greatest points of attack.
And this is the single biggest takeaway. Once you can put a name to the play, once you can stop and think, oh wait, that's a guilt trip, or hold on, they're creating false urgency, it loses all of its invisible power. It's like learning how a magic trick works. The whole illusion just shatters. Awareness is your shield. It lets you take a step back from the emotional pull, switch your logical brain back on, and make a conscious choice instead of just having an unconscious reaction.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. As you go about your week, just keep this playbook in the back of your mind. Notice the language people use, the pressures you feel. Recognizing the game is the first and the most important step to respectfully and confidently deciding that you're no longer going to play.